This is the Nitro Deck from CRKD, a cradle-style controller that you can slot your Nintendo Switch into that promises to make it a more comfortable handheld experience by virtue of essentially turning it into a larger handheld device, while also offering a number of other features, probably the largest of which is that it is one of the many new options coming out that addresses the fears of stick drift by including Hall effect sensor sticks. This is not the first Switch accessory to take this type of shape or form, but it is probably one of the most fully featured ones I've seen, as well as probably one of the ones with the largest actual marketing push behind it. I've seen a lot of interest in this particular cradle-style device, more than any past one I've looked at, and so I was very interested to get my hands on it and really see what it was like. Now, thankfully, the CRKD team did reach out and actually sent this review unit for me to try out, so thanks to them for that. This is not a sponsored video, but I am using a review unit that was sent to me for free. So, does it live up to the promise of being one of the best new ways to experience the Nintendo Switch? Let's talk about it piece by piece. To begin with, the basic idea behind a cradle-style controller like this, if you've never seen one before, is that it's basically just taking the Nintendo Switch tablet and slotting it into the body, basically acting like a pair of Joy-Cons, but instead of connecting via the rails, it's primarily being plugged in by the USB-C port at the bottom of the controller. Setup is pretty straightforward. All you have to do is take the Joy-Cons off your Switch and then slot it in. Although one important thing you need to make sure of is that the Switch in its settings menu does have the wired connection for Pro controllers enabled, otherwise it will not detect or use the Nitro Deck properly. This is of such importance that the Nitro Deck even comes with a big old warning label the moment you take it out of its packaging. In order to make sure that the Switch tablet is safely secured and not going to slide out of the controller and disconnect, or even worse off, have the tablet fall out and hit the ground, it does actually have some little locking mechanisms as part of the setup that you do have to make sure to press and hold a button to release so that you can then slide the tablet out when you want to. This does end up making removing the Switch tablet from the Nitro Deck a little bit awkward, but to be honest, I would rather have an awkward release mechanism that keeps the Switch safely locked in place than have it possibly risk the Switch tablet sliding out. Also, if you're curious about what particular model of Switch is supported by this, it is both the OLED as well as the original models. OLEDs are, of course, a little bit wider, but the Nitro Deck has been shaped in such a way that you can slot either tablet into its body with no problem. There's a tiny bit of a gap that ends up coming up if you're not using an OLED-style Switch, but the body is designed in such a way that it's not a visible gap, and it's going to work and look perfectly fine. Now, again, one of the main focuses of a device like this is to make the Switch have a better, more comfortable handheld experience. It's certainly not as portable as the regular Switch body with a pair of Joy-Cons is, but because of its larger shape, you're able to have a more comfortable grip around the body of it, which is much better on your hands for long play times. One thing I will say about this thing from a comfort standpoint with the way it is shaped and designed, because it went for a style where the grip is based more on holding the back of the system rather than handles that come down, it's very comfortable when you're relying on things that are on the top part of the controller, namely the left stick and ABXY buttons, whereas when using the D-pad or right stick often, a little bit less comfortable. Your grip is up here while your thumbs are bending more to get into place. For the D-pad, this isn't as big of an issue because not as many games require D-pad input for your primary control, although if you like using D-pad for things like more retro-style games, that is something worth being aware of. And if you're playing any games that make extensive use of camera controls where you're playing twin stick a lot, that is going to come up a little bit for your right hand. It's not absolutely all fulfilling, it's definitely an improvement over the ergonomics of just using the Switch with a pair of Joy-Cons, but I think it is important to point out that comfort-wise, it definitely excels at games where you're making use of the left stick and the 4-button setup more often than anything else. Speaking of sticks and buttons, I would say overall I'm pretty happy with how most of these feel, with some small exceptions. Some parts are definitely better than others. As far as the sticks go, once again, those are Hall effect sensor sticks, so they are meant to not drift over time like more traditional Switch sticks do. I would also say in comparison to official Switch controllers and a lot of other third-party controllers out there, the sticks on these have a relatively higher tension, which is something I personally enjoy. I like the feeling of a stick kind of fighting a little bit back on me instead of something that's just super loose. So that's something I'm pretty happy with. The front ABXY buttons are okay. I would say that out of everything on the controller, this is actually the part that feels a little bit more obviously like a third-party controller. There's just that difference between how these feel and official ones that you just can really notice. The D-pad on it feels solid, and as far as the shoulders go, the front L and R buttons actually have a mouse click feeling that I found actually to be a lot more satisfying when you favor clicking on the outer edge of the button. Although if you do prefer clicking close to the center, that still works. There's just a slightly more loose, almost wiggle feeling to it, while the back triggers are an actual full full pull design compared to the regular button that you have on a Switch Pro controller or on Joy-Cons, though they are a shorter stop compared to a lot of other traditional full pull triggers. I'd have a bit of a soft touch feel to them. It actually reminds me a lot of the DualShock 3. Features-wise, aside from being a larger, more comfortable controller and having those Hall effect sensor sticks, it's fairly straightforward with a couple important ones worth noting. It does maintain the ability to use motion controls and does have built-in rumble as well. It's not the same experience as HD rumble that is built into Switch Pro controllers and Joy-Cons, but if you're just in the market for third-party in general, nothing's offering that anyways. And I would say that overall, the rumble experience on it does feel pretty good. It's a little bit on the lighter side, but still impactful enough that I would say that it stands out whenever a vibration happens, but it's not going to be a really heavy one that might catch you off guard every now and then, like I've had happen with some third-party controllers. Also, like many other options out there, while it does support those other two features, it does not support an NFC reader, so if you want to scan any amiibo, not going to be an option using this controller. As for special features that are not standard to a lot of other options out there, this does come with 4 remappable back buttons on the back of the Nitro Deck. They're all fairly prominent and actually very similar to the back buttons on the Steam Deck, which, is part of the name inspiration here very clearly. And setting these up is very straightforward. It's very similar to what some other controller options have used for onboard programming. Basically, you hit and hold the program button, wait until the home button lights up a certain way, press the button or combination of buttons that you want to map, then press which of the buttons on the back you want to map that to, and you're good to go. There are also some shortcuts with this that can be used for things like just wiping all 4 settings right away in case you want to have a fresh, clean start with what each one is mapped to. The placement of these remappable buttons does mean that your fingers are going to be resting on them very often, but I will say the resistance on them, for me at least, definitely felt high enough to where I never had any accidental misclicks. I never had a situation where I just lightly brushed one and suddenly I did the button it was assigned to. You definitely need to apply a decent bit of pressure to register an actual button click, which is important because obviously you don't want to hit the button when you don't want to. It needs to be a very intentional thing. So while their placement might be a little scary in that regard because your finger is going to be hovering around them a lot, misclicking is another thing that at least happened to me. While the Nitro Deck does take up the USB-C port at the bottom of the Switch, meaning that you can't plug power into there is a pass-through input that you're able to use, so if you want to charge the Switch while it's in the Nitro Deck, that's not an issue. There's an additional port that's labeled as output that the use for it was not immediately obvious to me. I actually had to go and look into the instructions for what this was for because I didn't know if it was maybe some kind of dock pass-through, so you could try to use this for video out or something. It's not that. What it's actually for is that it allows you to use the Nitro Deck as a controller while your Switch is docked otherwise if you just want to use it as an extra controller on hand. The way this works is that you have to press and click in the left and right thumbstick at the same time to activate controller mode, and then you run a USB-C cable from the body of the Nitro Deck to your Switch dock, and you can use it as a controller, which is an interesting bonus feature. I don't know how often that would really be my first choice compared to really any other option out there, just because, again, the point of using something like this is for the handheld mode experience of it. It becomes a much lighter feeling controller, and while it is ergonomically better than using a Switch regularly, a traditional Pro controller or even third-party controller that's designed like a traditional controller is going to end up being just a better choice most of the time. Still, handy bonus feature, though perhaps a very niche use. Oh, and if you are a fan of using your Switch in tabletop mode, the Nitro Deck does have its own built-in kickstand as well. It's a little similar in design to the original Switch kickstand, where it's just the one thin part coming out, but it is a thicker design with a much stronger hinge. Definitely more effective design compared to the original Switch's kickstand. One other special feature of this controller I want to touch on real quick that, in all honesty, is not something that really interests me a whole lot. It's not really a thing I interact with much, but I think it is important just to mention for those of you that might be into this. It looks like Cracked is trying to go for this collector aspect with some of their accessories, where you can basically get the Cracked app on your phone, scan the RFID on the Nitro Deck itself, and then it registers and catalogs that you own this Nitro Deck and even gives you a ranking based on its production number and the rarity of that particular design. Digital collectibles like this don't really appeal to me all that much. I mean, I don't even mess with the PlayStation 5 thing that they launched late last year. Just not a thing I really care about. But if that is something you're into, it is an aspect of the service and looks like something Cracked is planning on growing over time as they release more accessories. Now, speaking of rarities, there are basically 6 different versions of this system that are currently listed. 3 that are standard options that just come in a black, gray, or white by themselves for $59.99. That's in USD. And then a more expensive Nostalgia Edition version that comes in either the GameCube Purple, an SNES Gray, or a GameCube Mint. These options are priced up higher at $89.99, but do come with additional accessories on top of their special edition colors. Most importantly, a carrying case, which is very convenient to have since the larger size of this means is not going to really fit in most traditional Switch cases, as well as a couple additional accessories like coming with a C2C cable when you want to make use of the Nitro Deck's controller functionality, and some swappable stick heads with a slightly different design. Now, with that in mind, of course, the big question is the Nitro Deck worth its asking price? And currently, I find myself walking away with the feelings of yes, but it's definitely a little tight. It doesn't feel like the best value out there by any means, and it's an interesting thing to compare to what it's directly competing against. Because in my mind, it's not really directly competing with other controllers that offer Hall effect sensor sticks right now, because a lot of those other controllers are more traditional pro-style controllers, something that you'd be using for tabletop or, more importantly, docked-style play. Whereas the cradle design of the Nitro Deck really is something that competes a lot more with either other cradle-style controllers, larger third-party Joy-Cons that slot on the sides of the system, that like the Split Pad Pro from Hori, or even just going up against Switch grips like the Satisfy, which makes the Switch more comfortable in handheld mode. That's really the biggest problem I think it's tackling, right? Is offering a more comfortable handheld gaming experience while simultaneously offering you Hall effect sensor sticks, which we just don't have a lot of other options for at the moment, at least when it comes to controllers that slot directly onto the Switch body, or doing modification work yourself and buying Hall effect sensor sticks to put into traditional Joy-Cons. And if those are the two main things you're really looking for, Hall effect sticks to avoid potential stick drift in the future and having a more comfortable on-the-go experience, I think the Nitro Deck answers that question. When it comes to the idea of just being an outright better way of playing the Switch, I'm a little more mixed on. You're still giving up certain core features that Joy-Cons traditionally offer, like HD Rumble, as well as the NFC reader. And while again, the ergonomics on this thing are solid and the buttons and sticks all feel good, there are other controllers I've certainly used that I think handle some of these individual aspects better. It is an overall solid controller that most importantly addresses the two biggest problems it's trying to fix: comfort and sticks. So those are my thoughts on the Nitro Deck. If you are interested in grabbing one, I do have the link posted down below in the description so you can check that out. As always, if you enjoyed this video, hit the thumbs up button to let me know. Subscribe if you haven't yet, and I'll see you guys later.